Hi, my name is Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss something that on the face of it could be considered to be a common threat to people of all political persuasions and so should transcend politics, but doesn't in the UK, even though it does indeed throughout most of the rest of the world. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I received a tweet recently, this week. Now, don't get me wrong. I can perfectly well understand how there are things that should transcend politics, and this is one of them. If the government were trying its best and getting the odd thing wrong because, well, tried and trusted methods for dealing with it are still sort of in their infancy, then any criticism would indeed be political cheap shots, and those persisting in that criticism should indeed really just get on board with helping instead of carping. In most countries, they are dealing with this. The response has been led by science. Public health experts have determined the best way to proceed, and their governments have backed them. Their ministers have gone on television to inform the public of the facts and to explain the rationale for their actions. In other words, the politicians have not been deciding what to do based on poll ratings, economic forecasts, or newspaper headlines, but how best to protect the public that they serve. In those countries, this is not political in the slightest, at least not partisan political. The UK is different though. This is because our response has been, and continues to be, led by political concerns and political decisions. About a year ago, the greatest threats to British lives were austerity, which had already killed in excess of 100,000 people in this country, and Brexit, which was threatening to do at least as badly, if not worse. There were Remainers who wanted us to leave the EU without a deal. They didn't want us to leave the EU at all, of course, because they were Remainers. But the fear was that if we fumble our way to another referendum and then end up not leaving, because of course a referendum would have reversed that result, there was still a huge chunk of the population who would feel that we must leave. Not that they want to, but somehow it's a national imperative. It reached fever pitch. They would feel betrayed, and society would never actually heal because you'll never convince them that Brexit was a really bad idea. So these Remainers were wanting the no-deal Brexit to expose just how bad a decision it was for those who wanted to leave, so we could as a nation come to our senses, heal, and then get back into the EU. Let all the poisons come out, show just how much of a con the whole thing was. And the logic was fairly flawless as far as I was concerned, but I was opposed to it because of the extra lives that would be lost and the millions more that would be plunged into abject poverty. And no, not all of these people actually voted for it. The same line of thinking exists here. As a result of the UK's response to this, we are facing many unnecessary lives lost. But the government have changed tack. So it's all better now, isn't it? No? Well, yes and no. The government have changed because they're facing up to the fact that this is going to be devastating. It's been revealed that the government's original strategy would have cost an extra 250,000 lives. Lives that would have been lost unnecessarily rather. You know, and I still can't help wonder how much it would have frightened the government if the most at risk weren't in their core voter demographic. But I'll be charitable and just assume that they've realised the magnitude of their error and that they want to do something to correct it. But it isn't like the government have suddenly just gone, do you know what? Yeah, this is too serious. Tell us health experts what to do and we'll do it. That's not what they're doing. They haven't suddenly decided to behave. They have reluctantly decided to pursue some measures. They are still not deferring to health experts. There are still things that should be being done that are not being done. You know, it was a bit of a nonsense for me to see Boris Johnson suggesting that he's going to be calling other G7 leaders and suggesting that they follow World Health Organization advice when he himself is not. And those are political decisions. That we won't have the capacity in the NHS due to chronic underinvestment over the past 10 years. That was a political decision as well. But, you know, we're in the here and now. There is no point in banging on about the past. Just like austerity, really. Just like a no-deal Brexit was. But the no-deal Brexit is still a present-day decision that is being made. The decision not to extend the transition period, which may still see a U-turn at some point, But that's the current position, that we're not going to extend the transition period. That's a political choice. Deciding not to routinely test people who develop symptoms. One of the things the World Health Organization say you absolutely need to do. The decision not to do that is a political decision. To not give doctors and nurses the equipment they need to protect themselves is a political decision. That, of course, means that they are going to expose themselves to greater risks, which means inevitably that more medics are going to succumb to the illness, which means, of course, they won't be able to work because they're going to have to self-isolate or be treated, overloading the NHS still further with fewer and fewer staff. That is all a political decision. None of these things are even up for consideration in many countries. The politicians ask, what is the best thing to do to protect the people? And then they do it. This is why it's not really political in lots of other countries. The politics has been bypassed. In this country, they ask, what's the minimum they have to do to avoid looking like monsters? Not being monsters, just looking like monsters. But they still want their tax cuts. This is why it's political. Our response is political. Take the first press conference on Monday. You knew that Boris Johnson was still not following advice, even if you didn't know anything else, even if you weren't looking at what actual public health experts that were independent were saying. Because you just watched this press conference and there were a few little issues, but there was one huge contradiction from the chief medical officer. Contradicting himself in a way that no intelligent man would have done had he been pursuing what he was actually advising, but it's because he was pursuing an indefensible political line. So in response to the question about the fact that this action, although welcome in some ways, although it doesn't go far enough, is coming too late, we should have done it weeks ago, he responded by saying that actually we were taking action earlier than other countries at the same point on the curve. Now we know that's not true, but that's what he was saying. But that's not the contradiction, that's just something that's not true. The contradiction is that in that same press conference, they were also describing how London was weeks ahead of the curve compared to the rest of the UK. So then you'd say to yourself, so why weren't measures implemented in London weeks before the rest of the country then? So that's why this is political. It's why it is right and proper to hold the politicians in power to account over this while they are still steering the ship. If they wish to hand over decision making to those equipped to do so, then fine. We'll just hold them to account for the harm that is caused by the weeks of delay in doing that. But while they still wish to retain control and make our response political, which is their decision, you know, when they want to still steer the ship with having no idea what they're doing, it is still political, and I will still try and talk about it where YouTube allow it. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.